Okay, I have 8:03, so I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off. So, welcome everybody to our, I think, third road to residency, second road to residency. I can't remember what number it is this year, but I am honored to be joined by one of my colleagues, Dr. Dragojlovic, and we are going to talk all about the standardized letter of evaluation today, which is a new one because the standardized letter of evaluation, or SLOE, is new this year. So we know that a lot of people have probably been hearing chattering and may have a lot of questions. So we've got a couple slides, which is a little different than if you've been to some road to residencies in the past. We usually just do kind of a question-based format, but we do have a few slides this time that we'll go through to get kicked off, and then we'll just sort of open it up to an open forum. Feel free to use the chat, feel free to unmute, whatever is the easiest and seems, whatever you would like to do. And then Jewel is our lovely partner in crime who coincidentally has been helping us develop everything for the standardized letter of assessment or evaluation. And so she's going to be a great resource as well. And there may be questions that you guys have that we may end up deferring to her. We'll see what questions you have. So let me go ahead and share my little screen. Let's see. Okay. Nikola, can you confirm you can see that?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. And then I figured we can kind of just go back and forth. We didn't really talk through this, but we can just kind of go back and forth and talk it out.
Let's do it.
So as a background, so that you guys know who we are, if you've never been to Road to Residency, both of us have been involved with the Road to Residency webinar. I am the program director for the Combined Peds Rehab Program in Cincinnati, and also coordinate the medical students that rotate through our group as well. Nico, do you want to kind of do your thing, and then how we got to this?
Sure. And I'm Nikola Dragojlovic. I'm the residency program director for PM&R at UT Health in Houston, and been residency program director since September of 2020. So Ashlee and I have been a part of AAP Residency and Fellowship Program Directors Council since 2024. No, 2022, actually, 2022, which is when we first started working with Jewel to improve recruitment practices across the country, right? So if you think back to 2022, we're in the midst of the COVID pandemic, right? Everything has transitioned to virtual recruitment. It totally upended residency application processes, right? And so Ashlee, myself, Jewel, and many other program directors, program coordinators, medical students, and residents who are on our committee worked to come up with that initial best practices for PM&R residency that sort of define the ground rules that program directors and medical students who are applying to PM&R need to play by in order to be fair and trying to make this process as transparent and level fielded as possible. And in 2024, Ashlee and I took over as co-directors of this sub-council. And one of the things that we identified that was an opportunity for improvement in graduate medical education was the letters of recommendation in PM&R. And those of you who know our specialty, you know that our physiatrists, as lovely as they are very much people with rose-tinted glasses, right? We like to see the good in everyone. But when it comes to applying for a residency program, right, you need to be able to discriminate applicants, right? And in the background of us trying to improve graduate medical education and recruitment, we're seeing, USMLE and COMLEX exams go pass fail, medical schools going pass fail. We lost metrics on class rank, class quartile, right? And so it started to become very difficult to figure out who has this particular advantage on their application or that particular advantage on their application. And so this is happening in the background also of a lot of research coming out in graduate medical education that talks about the biases present in narrative letters of recommendation, sort of the typical letters of recommendation that people would write, oh, Dr. Bolger rotated with me for 4 weeks on my inpatient service, and she was simply amazing. She took care of her, fellow students and residents, and she looked after everybody, and she worked really hard, right? That tells me some things about Dr. Bolger, but like that doesn't tell me necessarily all the useful information I need to figure out if she's going to be a good resident in the future or if she's going to be a good fit at my program. So the idea of creating the standardized letter was to create a letter that reduces bias, right? And reduces gender biases that are common in narrative letters of recommendation, and try to make something that's a little more standard, right? That speaks to our specialty and provides opportunities for faculty to talk about objective strengths and weaknesses in sort of a safe place, i.e. the standardized letter of evaluation. So with that intro, I'll let Ashlee kick it off.
Yep, perfect. And I'm going to do the caveat that if you noticed, I kind of like paused and froze, and I'm not sure what my internet is doing. So if for some reason I lose you, I will come right back. I don't exactly know what's going on here, but we're going to try this. So let's get started. Okay. So Nikola had a great introduction to this. And some of you may have friends that are going into specialties that have been doing standardized letters of evaluation for many, many years. So EM or emergency medicine is probably the one that's been around the longest. I think it's been somewhere in the 25-ish year range. They've done it for a really long time. They now have multiple iterations of it, multiple forms that they can use. So there's other specialties that do it too. So OB-GYN, internal medicine has it, ortho has it, neurosurge. And a lot of people have been trickling in and going to this way. So we are not new from a, first person to use a standardized letter of evaluation, but certainly this is new for PM&R for this year. And so, like Nikola said, it's really just trying to provide a comprehensive assessment of your suitability as the applicant for residency training by evaluating cognitive as well as non-cognitive skills, and hopefully allows for a little bit easier comparison to your peers. So what's included in a SLOE? So in general, it's very similar to what you guys are going through for, rotation evaluation type formats. So it's really designed to assess your performance on a clinical PM&R rotation. So clinical being the key word, and we can talk through that a little bit later. But with different things that are common that you're going to encounter as a fourth year medical student. So different activities, different tasks, different skills that we would expect, the average fourth year medical student to be, at least satisfactory in. Maybe some are a little bit better than others, but skills that are not surprising for you to have as a fourth year medical student. We used the framework for the AAMC and trustable professional activities. I know that many, at least MD schools, I don't know how many DO schools use this, but for MD schools, because they're accredited by the AAMC, a lot of them are required, I believe, to use this kind of framework. And so that's sort of the basis for how we started designing this SLOE, and similar to what a lot of the other specialties use. So again, it's targeted at things that we expect a large group of fourth year medical students to be able to do. And then we also just kind of throw it out there, it's not taking away the narrative comments. So there is still a section in the standardized letter where your letter writer or writers can write really whatever they want, right? It is limited in space, so it's not a free-for-all completely, but they can choose to write whatever they would like in there. So that is not completely going away. And I think a lot of people worried about that, like, oh, there's these great things that maybe this individual saw me do or, can comment on that aren't really as part of a standardized assessment or an evaluation. And so there is definitely still an area for that to come into play. Like Nikola alluded to, so and kind of already set the groundwork. So the evidence that's out there kind of says these big things about standardized letters. So reduces gender and racial biases that are present in narrative letters of recommendation. Standardization is a big thing. So hopefully providing a consistent and fair evaluation across different rotations, different programs. I think the other benefit that I've thought a lot about, because I live in both worlds as a medical student advisor as well as a PD, You don't have to worry so much about whether your letter writer can write a good letter. And I know you guys don't get to see your letters, but let me just tell you, there are a wide array of letter writer helpfulness. Like some people write amazing letters and you know, it's great that you got one from them, but some people really don't know how to write them. And it's not that the person in question was a quote unquote bad student or like would be a not great resident, but it was just that, you know, you happen to rotate with somebody that maybe isn't the best letter writer. So you know, for that sense, I think that's a huge benefit for you all as students is it's taking away that part because we're basically prompting the person to say like this is what we want you to comment on. So I think that that is super beneficial for you guys. And then we really tried to focus on relevant skills that are helpful to PM&R. So you know, our standardized letter is not going to look the same as emergency medicine. It's not going to look exactly the same as neurosurgery because let's be honest, like we're not the same specialties, and I don't necessarily need the characteristics that a neurosurgery residency program needs. I may not actually want the characteristics that, you know, a neurosurgery resident, you know, is looking for. And so we really tried to tailor it to the specialty of PM&R. And all of those discussions, you know, you may have heard on Road to Residencies of like what we're looking in an applicant. It's all based in that kind of mentality. Nikola, you want to talk about this since I've talked like the first few slides?
Happy to.
Yeah.
So, as Ashlee and I spoke about, the SLOE is going to be new for the 2025-2026 application season. And all of this information about the SLOE has already been discussed and provided to the residency program directors at the AAP meeting back in February and subsequent meetings that we've had in March and April. We've had a lot of interaction with faculty from across the country, not only as we were creating the SLOE, but in the multiple revisions of the SLOE that we went through in our committee, feedback we got from like external experts in graduate medical education when we were forming this, and then the AAP Board of Trustees, you know, reviewing the data and the information and understanding why this would be a beneficial thing for our specialty. So, you know, the SLOE content and the background of it, like Ashlee said, has sort of been vetted by a lot of different people in graduate medical education for this to be like a fair, objective, useful tool. And we've already been talking to program directors a lot about this. And we have the help of the American Academy of Medical Colleges, AAMC. Those are the people that run ERAS, right? So the AAMC is already contacting your medical schools. And for those of you who are applying to PM&R, your advisors should be hearing about the SLOE already if they haven't. And in order to help facilitate, you know, you doing well and the SLOE going well, we've asked, you know, you all as medical students to get a PM&R SLOE for the application season, right? So if you're going to be applying to PM&R, you might have a variety of letters of recommendation that you request. Most programs require at least 3 letters of rec, with one of them being a PM&R letter of rec. So we strongly encourage you to get a PM&R standardized letter of evaluation as your PM&R letter of rec, right? If you're going to get additional letters from other letter writers like internal medicine or vascular surgery or something, we don't have a SLOE for them. They could write a traditional letter of recommendation for you. So your PM&R letter of recommendation, you know, usually coming from an academic faculty member or someone who's accustomed to working with medical students, should be a SLOE. Residency programs are going to be looking for it, right? A lot of residency programs that we've talked to that host away rotations for students, they're already gearing up to use the SLOE for all of the people that are rotating with them for the letters of rec that they're going to be writing. They're going to be a SLOE. So this is not going to be new to, you know, academic departments across the country. The SLOE may be new to PM&R faculty who are maybe not accustomed to working with medical students as frequently, or maybe physiatrists in the community who don't follow, AAP and graduate medical education trends as closely as, residency programs do. And so this is why when you have rotations with these faculty members and you ask for a letter of recommendation, you're going to ask for the SLOE, and they're going to look at you maybe cross-eyed because they haven't heard of it, right? And you're going to tell them what it is, and you'll refer them to the SLOE website. And the SLOE website has a bunch of frequently asked questions, not just for evaluators who are going to be writing it, but for yourselves as medical students, right? For program coordinators, there's lots of background information there for you to read up on if you wish. But once your evaluator enters the SLOE website, then they'll have that templated form that they fill out, and then they'll upload it to ERAS letter of recommendation portal, just like any other letter of recommendation that you ask for, right? So when it comes time for you to apply to our specialty, our specialty came around a consensus of strongly encouraging you to have one PM&R SLOE during this application season. So if you get more letters of rec, whether from PM&R or other specialties that are traditional letters of rec, that's totally fine. But like we said, we strongly encourage you to get one PM&R SLOE. I've noticed some residency programs are already starting to talk about the SLOE on their program websites. So hopefully as we gear up towards, closer to recruitment and like application season, residency programs will be posting about this like on their social media or during their FAQs that they have ahead of the application season. And don't hesitate to ask the program coordinators or the faculty members, what they're looking for. Someone asked me, if we plan to get more than one PM&R letter, do you recommend doing all of these as a SLOE? Sure. There's no harm in doing more PM&R letters of recommendation as a SLOE, especially if you're rotating at an academic institution. One thing I will say about the SLOE is that the SLOE is also designed to be able to be written as a composite letter. So say you do a 5-week rotation at, a university program that has a residency, and you worked with 2 or 3 different faculty members. Those 2 or 3 different faculty members might come together and write one SLOE, and that's called a composite SLOE. And that's used in a lot of other specialties too. And so, I think if you're going to have more than one letter of recommendation, having another SLOE is great, right? I think if you performed well and you performed similarly, the SLOEs should echo each other. But if for whatever reason you're working with a different person who's not familiar with the SLOE and that happens to be a narrative letter of recommendation, that's fine too. We want you to get one. Someone asked, if our home program doesn't have a residency, but we are doing an away, is it okay to get a SLOE from the away and a regular letter from the community PM&R school? Or should we try to explain the SLOE to them? I don't know. That's like
You do you.
You do you. You could go down fork A or you could go down fork B, right? I think if you are in a place where you can get a SLOE from a letter writer that knows you well, do it. And if you get a letter of recommendation from, like some other program that's closer to you, that's okay too, right? Because you have a SLOE. So I don't think you need to like worry about trying to like game the system too much. I think you just like get the SLOE and you get the letters that you need, right?
And I would just say similar to that, like just like if you were collecting a myriad of letters, for your application, a lot of people get a lot more letters than they need. And they may choose to like put Dr. Smith, will just say, goes to these 10 programs because you think, for whatever reason, you think Dr. Smith needs to go to those 10 programs versus, Dr. White goes to another 10 programs. And so you can still do that. Like you can get multiple SLOEs. You can choose to submit them or not. We can't, as program directors, just so you guys know, like we can't see what you upload into your letter of rec portal. We just see the ones that you push through to our individual program. I also can't see like if Dr. Dragojlovic gets, certain letters I don't know that he got certain letters and maybe I got different letters from the same applicant. We can't see any of that. So there might be reasons that maybe something makes a little bit more sense to do that way. But I think, go with your gut instinct. I think, yeah, I agree.
So a
I think that
couple
was my
more
last slide. I'm
questions.
gonna
So
go
a couple
full.
more questions from the chat before we before we go on to that last slide, Ashlee. So, someone asked if my auditions are later in the season, would it be acceptable to have a SLOE uploaded later? And I said to that, absolutely. What I think you'll find is that, especially in PM&R, we know that not everyone has access to a home program, right? And so if you have letters that are coming in, after the ERAS opening date, that's okay. The best thing for you to do is communicate that information to the program coordinators that are receiving your application, right? Let them know, like, hey, I sent my application, but I'm expecting my SLOE in 3 weeks, or I'm expecting this letter of recommendation to come in like 2 weeks. They promised it on time, right? So if you're just open to the program coordinators and let them know what's going on with your paperwork, then they'll be able to mark it as like pending completion, and they have processes for like making sure that like they review that stuff, right? So I think the best thing to do in those cases where maybe the SLOE is coming later in the season is just notify the program coordinators of that, right? That also happens to other people with like COMLEX Part 2 or USMLE Step 2, right? They get their score a little bit later than ERAS opening for one reason or another. You can tell the program coordinators like, hey, my USMLE scores, my COMLEX scores are coming in a little bit later. Be on the lookout for them, right? So then they know that. And then someone also asked, can we do a SLOE on a rotation you already did? Sure. Because if they're going to evaluate you and write you a letter of recommendation, like a traditional narrative letter, they can also do a SLOE, right? So there's no reason why, like if you just finished a PM&R rotation, there's no reason why they couldn't necessarily, write a SLOE for you. Can you, Ashlee, can you pull up that last slide?
Yes. One moment. Maybe. Here we go. Maybe not.
It's almost like you have to go back, or if you can
On
just pull
what
up
is
your
this
last
doing?
slide.
Yeah, hold on one sec.
Um,
I tried it. Give me 1 second.
there we go. So important details for you all as students, right? So we already alluded to this, right? The AAP is hosting the PM&R SLOE, right? And on that website, there's lots of information for you all and the faculty members who are the evaluators who are going to be writing it for you, right? So when you send the email link to your evaluators, they'll have instructions on what to do, okay? You're not going to have to walk them through it or hold their hand. The letter writers, log into the website and complete the form that way. And then the PDF is emailed to them, and then they submit it onto ERAS just like any other narrative letter, right? So when it comes time to, ask for your letters of recommendation or ask for a SLOE, you might want to think about sort of like some of the pros and cons of this, right? It could be very hard for someone who hasn't worked with you very much to write you a SLOE if they don't have much clinical experience with you, right? Like if you only worked with them like a day and a half in clinic, that's pretty hard to evaluate someone in such a short period of time, right? Or say you have someone who's a research mentor that you want a letter of recommendation from, right? A SLOE is probably not a good letter from a research mentor because they haven't necessarily seen you in a clinical scenario and they've only worked with you intermittently on a research project. So a research mentor is probably a better person to get a narrative letter of recommendation from, or someone maybe that in a mentorship capacity but not necessarily a clinical capacity. Those would be people to get a narrative letter of recommendation from. You want to get the SLOE from people who have seen your clinical skills regularly, reliably, they can speak to your strengths, right? That's who you want to get the SLOE from. So someone was asking about people who are reapplying to PM&R, right? So if you are gonna be doing an intern year or a research year or something else like that, and you're reapplying to the specialty, um, should you try to get a SLOE? I think if you can get a SLOE from a PM&R faculty member who's observed your clinical interactions and patient care recently, you should. I think a SLOE from a year ago, maybe when you were like in a just new MS4 and you hadn't even necessarily like gone through the application cycle completely yet, that's probably not going to speak to all of your skills, right? Because most people who are doing an internship and reapplying to PM&R, those people have gained a lot of clinical skills, right? So, and most of the time, by the time you're applying to PM&R, you usually don't have an opportunity to do a PM&R rotation by the time the application season rolls around again. So in that case, I would say probably better to get a strong letter of recommendation from your program director of your internship, which is going to speak a lot more to your current relevant skills than a SLOE might, considering it was written like a year from experiences like a year prior, right? So I think in that case, a SLOE is a tough ask of a reapplicant who's currently in internship. A stronger letter from your internship program director, I think, is a much better move for that. Another question that came up in the chat, as program directors, do you recommend students still approach the SLOE the same way they would a letter of rec when asking? For example, in the past, when asking for a letter of rec, I'd approach the attending physician and ask if they're willing and feel able to write a strong letter of recommendation. How would you approach this with the SLOE? Well, the SLOE is very different than a traditional narrative letter, right? It contains like comparative portions, right? It contains objective portions about your clinical skills, right? And it has narrative parts too, where they can speak about like your soft skills in clinic or like a patient encounter that was exemplary and stood out. So when you ask someone to write a SLOE, they can't necessarily like write a strong SLOE or a weak SLOE for you because it has like objective and comparative measures, right? If a person puts down that like you are, this and that on the SLOE, you better be the best medical student they've ever had in their entire career, right? Because if the SLOE is done correctly, right, everyone's scores come out on a bell-shaped curve, just like all your other exams, right? So I would think that the idea of asking for a quote unquote strong letter, that's probably reserved for someone who you want to get a narrative letter of evaluation from. I think the SLOE is intended to be an assessment of your clinical skills that is like 100% authentic and not necessarily like fluffed up or inflated, right? Ashlee or Jewel, do you want to comment on that or give a different perspective?
Sorry, no, I agree. Sorry, I was also replying to things in the chat, so I was going back and forth, but I don't know that I have anything drastically different to add though.
Okay.
Same, yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. So someone asked, are traditional narrative letters going to be weighted any less than the SLOE? Ashlee, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think, I think our general rule of thumb is we don't know. But I would say my kind of gut is that it's probably going to vary from program to program. And I think think of it as just one part of your application. Again, in PM&R, we're looking at the big picture of an applicant. It's usually not one thing that we're going to be like, oh my gosh, this is the deal breaker. But programs are going to kind of have to figure that out on an individual basis, and that may depend on the program. I think as what we've learned from this process of developing this and talking through a lot of these things is like there are probably no two programs that have the exact same needs, requests. Like we're all a little bit different, and that's okay. Like, I think, just keeping in mind, as you go through this process, like your gut and where you fit, I think don't think too much into it. That's probably some of the best advice I try to give students is, your gut means a lot. And I think sometimes when we try to think through this and, as Nikola kind of alluded to, game the system, that we're not trying to play games. We're trying to make this, a little bit more transparent. But yeah, that was kind of my thoughts. I can finally see the chat now. So I see one that says, can programs start reviewing I don't know what was going on. Can programs start reviewing applications before all the letters of rec are uploaded, or do they typically wait until there's a certain amount of letters before reviewing? If your application is pending because of waiting for the SLOE, would this be a disadvantage? Again, I think this is probably variable depending on programs. I would say the same advice I would say for a traditional letter is the sense I get is that most PDs or application groups, whoever's reviewing applications, are probably not going to do a full review until all the components of your application are there. So meaning whatever that individual program requires for letters of recommendation or for this, that, or the other, I think most people are not going to look fully at your application until those are all in there. Does it have to be in there on like the first day that ERAS opens? I would say within a week. That's sort of my kind of gut. And that's what I would tell people for letters of rec as well. Like, just be open and transparent with your letter writers and make sure they know the deadlines. I don't imagine, and Nicola, correct me if you think differently. I think people are going to treat it in that sense as a regular letter of recommendation. So like whatever process they had previously, I don't know that it's going to drastically change, is my kind of gut feeling.
Yeah, I agree with that. We really don't know how PM&R programs are going to view the different types of letters, like between a SLOE versus a narrative letter. I will tell you that, just like Ashlee alluded to, every program has different processes, right? Every program has different times that they review application information. Every program has different ways that they weigh the importance of one component of the application versus another. So there's no way for us to know how programs are going to see the SLOE compared to other portions of your application or how they're going to weigh it, etc. So you just want the people who write the SLOE for you to know you well and be able to give you a fair and accurate assessment. And otherwise, you do your best on everything else, right? You're not going to know the key to the lock for every residency program, right? And there's no way to like template, oh, if I get so many research experiences and I have so many letters of recommendation and I get such and such score on my boards, then I'm definitely going to get an interview at all these places. PM&R doesn't work that way, right? I think in a lot of other specialties, especially the surgical specialties, the metrics matter a lot, right? Especially surgical specialties, right? They're looking at, how many publications you have and what was your step 2 score and what was your MSP quartile and all of this, right? In PM&R, you'll find that our recruitment practices are much more holistic, right? We're looking at your commitment to the specialty. We look at your experiences that made you the person who you are. If you had adversity in your life or your education, how did you overcome that, right? Every PM&R program director I know loves, a comeback story, right? And that's the thing that you have to remember is that every program is going to look for something different. So you be yourself in your application, right? You get as many strong inputs into the application as you can, and you go from there.
What other questions do people have? Oh, that's a really good question. If I've already received a letter of recommendation from a physician who would be a strong SLOE writer, should I still ask them for a SLOE? And if so, would it make sense to submit both the letter of rec and the SLOE or just one? I don't know that we've specifically talked about this example. My gut, my advice I would give is I wouldn't submit two letters from the same person to the same program. So if you have like we'll use Dr. Smith, that's apparently going to be my name today. If Dr. Smith already wrote you a traditional letter and you would like him or her to write you a SLOE, I think be respectful, but like I would be totally fine as if a student asks me to do that because this is very new. I would hope that that faculty member would not give you a hard time and would be gracious and say yes and that's fine. But I would not, like, if you're applying to one program, I would not use his or her traditional letter and their SLOE to the same program. Does that make sense? I don't know, Nikola, if you have any other thoughts, but that was sort of my gut reaction.
Yeah. I mean, if I will say that like you're putting your letter writer in a bit of a lurch, right? Like you're effectively asking your letter writer to write you two different letters of rec, right? And you say like, oh, I'm gonna gamble that this SLOE looks this way and send it to this program, and that my narrative letter of recommendation might be better in this part, so I'm gonna send it to those programs, right? Like I wouldn't do that. That creates one, an opportunity for you to make a mistake, right? Two is going to cause you like undue anxiety, right? You're going to wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat wondering, did you send Dr. Bolger or me the correct letter? And you don't need that in your life, right? So I would try to make the letters of recommendation a bit simpler would be my approach, right? Like if someone already offered to write you a letter of recommendation and it's not yet written, go back to them and ask them if they'll write a SLOE. If you're sensing a lot of pushback, like, oh, I don't get it, that sounds weird, I'm not comfortable with it, then have that person write you a narrative letter and get a SLOE from someone else.
Oh, good question. Is SLOE available for graduates or IMGs who are rotating and applying the cycle, or is it only offered to current medical students? It's available for anybody as long as you've had a clinical experience and a faculty member can comment on your clinical, you know, decision making. Now, again, like if it's just a shadowing experience, that may not be as easy, just because it's meant to be more clinical. But otherwise, yeah, they can definitely anybody can write it. And then
If
I've
you're
gotten
if
oh, go ahead. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna add, right? Like, there's a couple parts of the SLOE, right? One part of the SLOE asks the evaluators to explain how they know you, right? And like the nuts and bolts of your rotation, like inpatient, outpatient, clinic, whatever, right? And then we ask some elements about the rotation, like how many students rotate there? Like what's your grading scheme, right? And then there's portions about like, your interactions with the staff and the faculty members or the other residents, and like, were you on time? Were you respectable, and those sorts of questions, right? That speak to professionalism and readiness to enter the workplace, right? Because um, even though you're residency training, like it's still a workplace. And then there's objective assessments that speak to your clinical skills, right? So if you are, say, an international medical graduate and you're shadowing somewhere, a person could fill out the SLOE for you and they can do those like subjective portions and complete the narrative portions where like they write and talk about you, but they wouldn't necessarily be able to do the objective clinical part, right? Because if you're just shadowing, you can't do a physical exam, you can't write an HMP or do a patient presentation if you're just shadowing. So those sections would not be able to be scored. And they can still write a SLOE that way, and those sections can be filled out as NA if something doesn't apply to you. But you can still get it for, an observership rotation. And I think that's reasonable if you want to do that. And thankfully the SLOE has a fair amount of room for them to provide, a narrative description of how you did and your particular strengths, even if you shadowed and they can't provide that information about your clinical skills.
And I think one thing to just throw out there, and we've said it, but I want to just make sure that it's clear, if especially if you're familiar with some of the other specialties that do SLOEs. So like for us, we have one form this year. This is our first year doing it. We tried to make it as all inclusive, that as we could, so it doesn't have to be an academic faculty member. It can be a community physiatrist. We know that like not every question is probably going to get answered by every single SLOE person writing it, and so like that's okay. Some of the specialties that have been doing it for a lot longer have like this myriad of different forms that like, I'm thinking of an emergency medicine, but like they can be like, I'm a community ED doc, and they pick like the community ED doc SLOE form, or like I was on this specific rotation, and they have specific SLOEs for different things. And we're definitely not there yet. So don't worry if you're like, gosh, I just don't know if this person's going to be able to fill out every single line because I don't know what's in the form. Like I wouldn't worry about that at all. Because the likelihood is probably there's going to be a few things that they just can't comment on, but it's because we made it super broad. And so like, I would also say it, doesn't, an MSK faculty can fill it out, that you did primarily outpatient with. An inpatient person can fill it out. A consult person can fill it out. It's meant to be a broad kind of evaluation. And so, there might be gaps in it, but that's okay. So a couple other, I'm trying to like do chat thing. Is it okay to have a SLOE and a letter of rec from the same program, different physicians? I think this is going to be a little bit program dependent. I think I'll use my program for an example. And so I am in charge of both the pediatric rehab rotation and our adult PM&R rotation. And so for us, what we've chosen to do, we've talked a lot about this and like what's the most fair, what's the most equal, like how do we navigate this that works for all of us. And so what we are doing at this point is we chose to do we're one of the people, we're a small group, so we chose to do a group SLOE. We have some guardrails up around it who's included within that group SLOE. So if you request a group SLOE or a SLOE from us, it will be a group SLOE. And we, unless you're unless you had a research relationship that wouldn't fall under the category of SLOE, that might be a different example. But for the most part, we would not do in our institution a SLOE and a traditional letter because we're doing a group SLOE. But you can choose to get a traditional letter or a SLOE from us because we know that this is the first year and we want to give you guys that choice. But I think every program is navigating that differently. And so I also would just say, like, if you're doing aways or you're doing rotations wherever you're doing them, it is okay to ask, like, if you have an orientation, whether that's with the program, I don't know who does orientations, but like if it's the program director, if it's, whoever that is, ask that question because this is all different and we're all learning all at once. And I think there's going to be different approaches. A really big PM&R program is probably not going to be able to necessarily do a group SLOE. That's going to be a lot harder. And just there's so many factors that go into like what is the best option for a particular rotation and program. So I think just ask, like, don't feel like you're going to get like, the red X if you ask the question, because you shouldn't, like, you should not. So
yeah, the residency programs know the SLOE is coming, right? And they know that these questions are coming. And from my perspective, if you ask a residency program about like what their process is for like letters of recommendation writing the SLOE, and they're really secretive about it, to me, that's a red flag. I mean, but I will say, myself, Dr. Bolger, and many of the people who are involved in this committee, right? Like, we're passionate about being as transparent as possible, right? We're very passionate about trying to make this process as fair as and equitable as it can be. And so, we have that perspective about being as open as we can be. And so, I think asking the question from, a position of curiosity and knowing, how to best fulfill, the recommendations is your best bet, like Dr. Bolger said. It's also PM&R, right? Like, as much as you guys have been like rotating around like surgical fields and other specialties where like people are really intense, PM&R is not like that, right? Like, you should be finding people who are open and willing to have conversations about this and, help you, make you the, best applicant that you can be based on your experiences there.
Okay, I think now's a good time because I've gotten a few messages directed just towards me, and now there's a general question. And I was going to bring it up momentarily related to PEDS PM&R. So there's been a lot of people direct messaging me about PEDS PM&R and are we doing this and like how's that going to work? So the conversations I've had amongst the other three combined program directors is I get the impression that they are all on board. I don't know what their like things are going to do, but I know for us, we're going with that same recommendation. We highly recommend one SLOE. I don't care if it's PEDS PM&R or PM&R. It makes no difference to me. I think, it is what it is. You pick what you think would be best or like whatever works best for you. But we are definitely gonna obviously like this is my baby. I'm not gonna say I don't want to SLOE. So we're definitely gonna be highly recommending one SLOE, but doesn't matter to me if it's PEDS PM&R or PM&R. We will have another PEDS PM&R Road to Residency. I don't remember when it is, but it is on the calendar. So please come to that and we can ask the other PDs as well what they think about this.
That would be awesome.
So hopefully that answers, I think, most of the permutations of that exact same question that I've gotten directly. So I don't know what your first name is, but Mayberry, that's amazing. Oh, I love it. I love it.
I just looked it up. The PEDS PM&R Road to Residency is July 15th. And I can put that in
Thank you. I was
I will
like,
put that in
it
the
just
chat.
comes on my calendar. I don't know when it is.
I'll put it in the chat right now.
See, we live day to day just like you guys.
Yeah. Anything else that you guys have? We have about 9 minutes left because I'm going to keep us on time. Certainly, if we don't have any more questions, we don't have to sit here and stare at each other. But I want to make sure if there are things that you're having questions about or curious, let us know. I'm going to also think I'm going to put my email in the chat as well if there's things. And I know, Nikola, you probably already did. I wasn't paying attention, but feel free. Like if there's specific questions that you don't want to ask in a group format, please don't hesitate to reach out. Oh, never mind. I just sent it directly to someone. Sorry, Danielle. Didn't switch off your name. Yeah, thanks, Jewel.
So, shameless plug for another effort that the AAP is doing. So every year we have updated the guidelines or best practice recommendations, I should say, for residency programs and applicants during the recruitment season. So ours is going to be going live on the AAP website pretty soon here. Ashlee, Jewel, myself, and other members are actually going to be going over it tomorrow in a meeting to ratify it, stamp it, make sure it's ready. And so when those best practices show up on the AAP website, it'll get like tweeted, instud, written about, etc. So, pay attention to, AAP's social media space over the course of the next month or so, because apart from these great Road to Residency webinars, we're also going to be, posting the link to the SLOE when that goes live. We're going to be posting the link to the best practices recommendations for you all to review and see.
And then Anthony, I saw your hand go up before this other message came in, so I'm gonna say go.
Okay, I apologize. I have children in the background. So,
Don't apologize for kids. You're lucky that neither one of us had the screaming kid because they're both running around behind us, I'm assuming.
cool. So this is kind of just a general question about letters of rec. So in the event in your application, say you could get maybe 3 or even 4 letters of rec from a physiatrist, would it be more beneficial to have letters of rec from other specialties and not just like PM&R letters? Would you view that as you want to see a more balanced application, or if you could get several letters from physiatrists, would that be stronger in your application?
I think I mean, I don't know. I think you're going to get a different answer probably from like most of these things. Like some PDs may not answer this the same way, but I would say with the traditional letters of rec, I would just say like it more matters the strength of them and the stuff that's in them. And I know you guys don't know that because you can't see your letters of rec. Um, but I think there's definitely ones that you can tell, like, gosh, you worked with this person a lot. They were really able to comment on, good things, important things, however you want to interpret that. If it's a mediocre one where you're like, I mean, yes, you can get an extra one, but they've only worked with you for a day and a half a clinic. I would probably value another rotation where you maybe had more responsibility than that kind of letter. That's just kind of that's Nicola's doing the thumbs up thing. That's sort of my preference. I mean, it's going to change a little bit with the SLOE, obviously, because that just puts a different dynamic in it. But I don't think it's better or worse. I'm more just like looking at what they say. Because I think, some people have the luxury of getting that many rotations, others don't. And that's okay. I don't want anybody out there that thinks, they need 4 PM&R letters of rec. Just take a deep breath. You don't need 4 PM&R letters of rec. But I think it's more like, can they really like tell me what your strengths are and like just have a good like description of you more than anything?
Yeah, Anthony, you sum this up is with what Dr. Bolger said is
Yep.
quality over quantity. So,
Yes.
as Ashlee alluded to, if you ask, all 111 or 113 program directors across the country what their take is on like the best number of letters of recommendation, you're going to get as many answers, right? I definitely prefer quality over quantity. I personally, as someone who leads a residency program where we interact with a lot of different specialties, and we're a categorical program, so your internship is tied to us. So, when you become our resident, you're our resident from day one of PGY1. I want to make sure that you have clinical skills in other avenues apart from physiatry, right? Because most residency, like 2/3 of PM&R residency programs are, internal medicine or are advanced. So you're going to have to be applying to transitional years and internships, right? Or IM years or whatever. So generally, people have like 1 or 2 letters of PM&R. They usually have 1 letter from like IM or some other core rotation, like some core 3rd year rotation that can speak to like your overall general clinical skills on like a wards floor or like IM clinic or like FM clinic, right? Because that's going to be applicable to, your experience as an intern, right? Doing an internship. And then a lot of people use like the 3rd or 4th letter from some specialty that's like PM&R adjacent. So maybe neurology or rheum or sports medicine or ortho or something like that. Or, from someone that they did a research project with, right? Or, just someone from one of their rotations that, can write them a good letter of recommendation and can speak to their skills. So I personally do not see the value in like 4 P&R letters of recommendation. I would say get 1 or 2 letters of P&R tops, have the other one be like internal medicine or FM that you can use for your transitional years and your internal medicine years, and then have another one with something that's like P&R adjacent, or someone who really knows you well and can speak to, you know, other elements of your application. Because if I get an application and there's 8 letters of recommendation, I don't like, at some point when I'm looking through all those letters of recommendation, I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to keep track of like, did letter writer for letter 1 say the same or similar thing as letter writer for letter 7, right? Like at that point, I'm like, oh my God, I need another sip of my coffee. And I've got 100 more applications to review today, right? So I wouldn't go crazy with the number of letters of recommendation. Just so you all understand like the scope of this like application problem, right? Like our program has 4 spots. We got 650 applications last year. The year before that, we got 720, right? And we have 4 spots, right? And so this is one of the reasons why we made the SLOE, right? Is to enable program directors to figure out like A from B from C, and, you know, make it easier for people to identify who they want to interview, you know, who seems ready to them, who has the clinical skills that they're looking for, right? So when you start adding like all of these extra elements, like, oh, I've got like 8 letters of recommendation, you run the risk that, you know, program directors aren't even going to look through all of that, right? The other thing I will say is that it only introduces variability in your application, right? Because what if you think you're going to get a strong letter from somebody and it's not a strong letter, right? And you've got 2 letters that are really strong and you've got one that's like P, right? Like what happened on that 3rd rotation that you didn't get a good letter of recommendation compared to the others? So, you know, when you start amplifying all the extra elements of your application like that, you run the risk of introducing variability, and it has the potential to harm you.
Okay. So I see it is 9 o'clock. I am going to wrap us up. But this is not the end. We have lots more Road to Residencies coming up. So putting a plug in there. If there's other questions you have about different topics, certainly don't hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have specific questions or there's questions that we didn't answer. But this will all be posted, I usually say, in the next couple weeks. The video usually gets up sooner than the chat because the chat is dependent on me reviewing it and making it look pretty. So usually that takes 2 to 3 weeks depending on my life, but it will get up eventually, as are all the other Road to Residencies post on the AAP website that you can go back and watch or read the transcripts of at any point. So I will just leave it at thank you to Jewel and Nikola for joining us tonight. I feel like you guys have been my partners in crime for like 2 years doing this, so this has been kind of fun to see it come to fruition.
It's been amazing.
Yeah, but thank you guys all, students, for joining us as well, and hopefully you found this helpful. I know we don't have all the answers. But just have fun with this, and don't stress yourself out too much. Just go with your gut. I mean, your gut can't steer you wrong, is my underlying theme for most of my life. So just take a deep breath and you got this. But with that, I will wrap us up, and thank you guys so much for coming.
See you later, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night.